incoming state director, and I'm happy to welcome you to the Senator's 92nd Town Hall since first being elected to office. Our team is thrilled to be back in Monmouth County. Thank you for having us. So we start every town hall with the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is in the back of the chapel here, so if everyone can please rise. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now I would like to invite Deputy Mayor Quinn up to provide some remarks.
Hello everybody, how you doing? Well, I'll get kicked out of Asbury, but I'm going to start with greetings from Asbury Park, everyone. I want to acknowledge Councilwoman Angela Anderson and Councilwoman Eileen Chapman, and as always, I'm sure Councilwoman Yvonne King is coming late. She will be here. I have the honor of acknowledging Pastor Newton. I have to tell you, when the Kim team contacted us about doing this, two things. I want to say I've been the deputy mayor in Asbury for a decade, and a lot of people come to Asbury when they're campaigning, but once they're in office, we never see them again. So thank you so much, Senator, for coming again, truly. Many of you know we're a very blue town in a very red county, and so I appreciate the Senator coming out and talking to all of you. Pastor Newton, who's been a part of this church since 2022, one of my favorite pastors in all of Asbury Park, and one of the fastest growing denominations, church denominations. I'm not a church person, so bear with me when I say that. But he's doing a great job, and that's the point. He's doing fantastic. And let's all send him all good vibes, because he is defending his doctorate tomorrow morning. So can we all send him all good vibes? And to those of you in Asbury Park, I know we can get spicy. Let's just be respectful with our spiciness tonight for the fact that the Senator came out to talk to us. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor. And I know what many of you are thinking when you walked in. You saw in the vestibule there was a banner with the pastor on that banner. And as I stepped up, I know what you're thinking. He looks even more handsome in person. I get that. But we are so honored to be able to host this event. I want to say good evening. On behalf of the St. Stephen A. Zion Church, I welcome you to this town hall meeting. We are honored to host this space for community. Across our state and nation, decisions are made, of course, that directly impact our families, our neighborhoods, and our future. Issues cross the spectrum of things. They are not distant issues. These are local issues, personal issues. And during Black History Month, it is important to acknowledge that it was in spaces like this where enslaved Africans first imagined freedom. In spaces like this where strategies for the Underground Railroad were whispered and prayed over. Spaces like this where men and women organized boycotts, marches, and movements that will ultimately change this nation. That space is the Black church. Black church has always been more than just a religious institution. It has been a meeting place for justice, headquarters for hope, and a launching pad for change. And that is why this town hall matters and why we are so honored to host this meeting. It reminds us that democracy is not something that happens far away in Washington. It happens right here. So we are grateful to welcome tonight a leader who understands not only New Jersey, but understands that it is not just a place on a map, but it is a community of people whose voices deserve to be heard, whose futures deserve to be protected. And Senator Andy Kim has served this state, has he not, with integrity, humility, and a commitment to public service. And I'm grateful that he is not here just to speak, but here to listen. So it is my esteemed honor to introduce and welcome Senator Andy Kim.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, and I just can't believe, Pastor, that your defense of your dissertation is tomorrow. That's amazing. So, like, do you need us to run through some questions and mock defense? Or I remember when I went through mine. I guess it's 15, 16 years ago now. I was definitely a bit of a mess. So I wish you the best, and let's all make sure we're leaving it in good hands here tonight, so he doesn't have to worry about it. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Asbury Park. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you to all the local leaders. Thank you to all of you for coming on out here. This is such a pleasure to do. It's so important to do. I truly believe that the town hall is an incredibly important American tradition. I think it's an incredibly important democratic tradition. At a time when we see our country getting more and more divided, when we see online discussions and other things, really getting in the way of us being able to just confront each other and talk to each other as people, to try to recognize the respect that is necessary within our democracy. At every single town hall, Kristen, you said this is the 92nd one, is that right? At every single town hall, I say, whether you voted for me or not, you're my boss. My job is to serve you and your family to the best of my ability. Are we going to agree on everything? Absolutely not. We're going to have differences of opinions, but that's why it's important for me to hear from you, because you are my boss. You are my bosses. And I need to hear from you. I need to hear your perspectives, what is on your mind. But it's also important for you to hear from me, hear what it is that I've been focusing on, my perspective on different issues, so that we can try to make decisions together as a community. My job is not that I'm not the CEO, I'm not the president of this state. I am a representative, I'm a public servant. And I really just want to continue to serve with that type of approach first and foremost. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining me here today. There are a lot of different issues that we are struggling through as a country right now, and I'll talk through some of them. We also have an incredible speaker, Kay Harris, who will join us in a couple of minutes to talk about the importance of observing and celebrating Black History Month. But I just wanted to start with some of the issues that I know are very much on our minds. A couple weeks have passed since we saw the horrific shootings of Alex Preti and Renee Good, but I know it still feels very recent, right? It still feels very fresh to a lot of us, because what we are seeing is a level of violence, a level of just challenge that we're facing as a country that's really just shaking us to our core in so many different ways. I don't know if you saw and read the statements from their families, but just for this to happen, not only for that to happen, but to have people like Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller call them domestic terrorists, trying to inflame the situation, pour gasoline on the fire. I mean, it's so wrong, it's so dangerous, and it just gets to so much of the challenges that we're facing right now. I was participating in a hearing in the Senate with the director of ICE, the director of the CBP, and when I was going through this, it was just the other week, it just again highlighted so much of the challenge that we're facing and just the extremism in their tactics. For instance, I was pointing out that when you think through and you add together the police forces of Minneapolis, of St. Paul, of the state troopers of Minnesota, those three big pillars of the state, it's about 1,700 police officers that they have. The sheer number of federal agents deployed through ICE and CBP were between 3,000 and 4,000 federal agents. So just like giving you that perspective, nearly twice the number of federal agents compared to the local law enforcement. And that's why, on the ground, it was very much, the word that I hear from people in Minnesota is it felt like they were an occupied state, that they were an occupied city in Minneapolis. And I wanted to hit that home to you because, look, we're facing challenges right here in our own state, within our own communities, right? I mean, we see the problems, whether it's Delaney Hall up in Newark, which I've been to a couple times, and just seeing just the inhumane treatment at these detention facilities, especially the fact that they're run by these for-profit companies that are just making billions of dollars off of that, industrialization of human misery. Or the fact that right now, ICE is trying to purchase a warehouse out in Roxbury, out west of Morristown, and the community there doesn't want it. Nobody in the state wants it, because we know that this is just going to further enable the type of the actions that ICE has been taking all across this country and furthering that problem. But it's just what you see in Minnesota is really the culmination of that. When I asked the ICE director, because on that day that we did the hearing, they announced that they're going to remove the surge from Minnesota, something that they should never have done in the first place. But certainly should have de-escalated immediately upon just the rise of the challenges that they faced there. So I asked the ICE director, I said, now that you've seen so much of the damage that you have done to this state, to this country, can you look me in the eye, can you tell Congress that you will never use this surge tactic again? Because when I see you leaving Minnesota, the first thing that comes to mind is where next? Is it going to be New Jersey? Is it going to be some other state? So I said, can you look me in the eye and tell me that this is not a tactic that you're going to use again? And of course, you know what he said. He said, no, you can't do that. Because this is still in their blood. This is deep to the core. This isn't just about one or two leaders. This is a rot within the institution. Not just of ICE, but we see it with CBP, which was the entity that was responsible for the killing of Alex Preti. We see it across the Department of Homeland Security, whether that's Kristi Noem, who I think many of you will agree should not be in that job, should be fired, should have to be resigned, or should have to be forced out of that job. But it goes beyond that too, right? Because I'll be honest with you, as I've seen up close how this administration works, even if she's removed, even if the head of ICE is removed, this administration will just put right back in somebody else that will just continue to do their bidding. Because we know that so much of this goes right back up to people like Stephen Miller, who I think is right now the most dangerous person in this country. And goes right up to Donald Trump, who he himself said, that they weren't going to change tactics, that they're not going to back down even after the killing of Alex Preti and so much of what we saw. So it's important to keep that in mind. Important that we are focused in on the different challenges that we're facing. And look, like I said, right here in New Jersey, we got to do our part. Look out for different communities. I mean, right here in this area, right, there was an incident at the Wawa up on Bridge Ave, up in Red Bank, where ICE was there and just profiling people in the parking lot, grabbed somebody that's still in detention now. We see it up in Jersey City, where there are ICE agents there saying that they don't need a warrant, as if the Constitution was just optional for them. It's advisory to them, apparently. These are the types of challenges that we'll continue to see. So, look, I'm going to go out to Roxbury, talk to the community there, do everything we can to continue to stop it. I know the news made it sound like it was a done deal. As far as I know, it's not. And we're going to continue to push to stop that. Other issues that I'm going to continue to go out to these different detention facilities, shine a light on this revolving door. And again, it's not just that it's for profit. It's like the company that runs Delaney Hall, for instance, Geo Group. You want to know who used to work at Geo Group? Tom Holman. You think that's a coincidence, right? You think it's a coincidence that Geo Group gives millions of dollars to Donald Trump's inauguration and to other things like that, and then gets these big contracts right back to them? That's part of the problem here, is that it has become just this whole ecosystem of corruption that I think is just so deep to the bone of so many of the problems, and it manifests in just such inhumane ways. There was this one instance, again, I raised in that hearing with the ICE director, where there was a father that was taken by ICE in custody and left their 6-year-old daughter wandering the streets asking people if they have seen her dad. I mean, just like how heartbreaking is that? You know, I got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, but even if I didn't have kids, I know that that's wrong. It's just fundamentally, morally wrong. And so, like, that's what I hate so much, is that we have become, you know, we are losing touch with that sense of humanity. Like, you know, we're becoming a nation addicted to anger. We're having this crisis of empathy as a country, you know, failing to be able to see just what things are like through other people's eyes. I just urge you to continue to go out and engage with the community, to be able to see this in terms of the challenges that we're facing. That I hear from leaders across New Jersey, some of them are telling me that they and people in their communities are now carrying their passports around because they're worried about whether or not, you know, they're going to get stopped on the streets or something like that. You know, we've been pushing to make sure that, you know, religious institutions and healthcare facilities and schools, you know, that shouldn't be a place where ICE should be able to show up and grab people. You know, we have to be thinking about just the core of our communities. And that's something that I promise you I will continue to fight for. I think that this is so important for us now more than ever to be able to think through how we move forward on this. And so much of this is actually taken away from the core issues that I hear from so many people about, which is still about affordability, still about the challenges that we face when it comes to housing, when it comes to healthcare costs. When it comes to, and I know Asbury, I know you know, there's a lot of issues here about housing costs, a lot of issues about rental costs, a lot of issues about development and making sure we're developing the right way. The pastor and I and some others had a conversation about challenges of unemployment, especially in the black community, and making sure that we are lifting up opportunities for everybody. You know, that it isn't about who you know or how much money you donate to so-and-so. It's about fairness, just fundamental fairness when it comes down to it in terms of these opportunities. But does it look like we have fairness now? Like, you know, when Donald Trump, I was there in the Rotunda when he was inaugurated, and in his speech, he talked about this is going to be a golden age for America. Well, look, 14 months in, or 13, I don't know, it feels like 8 years in, like, does it feel like a golden age for America? You know what it is? It's a golden age for those billionaires that are up on stage with him at the inauguration. You know, it's a golden age for Mark Zuckerberg, for Jeff Bezos, it's a golden age for Elon Musk, and for TikTok, and, you know, all these others that were willing to kiss the ring. And that's what I just find so deeply broken, you know, about this. Because as I was just telling you about these ICE raids and CBP and the CERT, you want to know where that came from? It came from you in terms of your money. That it was that reconciliation bill that literally did a wealth transfer from those that are on Medicaid, who are the most vulnerable in our communities, took that money and gave it to Homeland Security, gave it to Stephen Miller, gave it to those that... So I just wanted to connect the dots there. Because this is not only a president that isn't focused on affordability, he could care less about your affordability. He is a president that is literally making things harder for us on so many of the issues that are fundamentally important to us. And I just think that that is important, because that kind of corruption, whether that's literally the billions of dollars, I often say, you know, Trump's family has made billions of dollars since January 20th last year. How much has your family made in the last 13 months? You know, whether it's that kind of direct wealth transfer or it's about just the implicit corruption of these contracts, the Geo Group and Core Civic and others, that's something that I hope we are all able to focus in on. And we'll get back to some of that later, and I've got a couple other issues I want to engage, but as we're going through this, I didn't want to just bring up Kay Harris. Where's Kay? There. So, Kay, if you don't mind, why don't you welcome up Kay Harris here to be able to take a step back here. And give us a reminder, because when we want to think about where we're going as a country, especially as we're observing and celebrating our 250th anniversary as a nation, you know, I think it's important for us to be able to acknowledge all of our history. To acknowledge not just, we don't want a situation where we're literally continuing to see this government pulling down panels in Philadelphia that are talking about slavery, right? You probably saw that in the news. Thankfully they just put the panels back up because of a judge. But one thing I just want to say before I hand it over to Kay, the government attorney that was arguing to justify them pulling those panels down, this is what he said: the government gets to choose the message it wants to convey. That is wrong. Just flat, disgustingly wrong. And I just wanted to share that with you because that's what they say out loud. You can imagine what they think inside their thoughts there. But it shows you what we're up against. The selective history that is out there. Whereas for us, we need to understand the totality of it all. The good and the bad. The things that we have to learn from. And that's why at some point, that's why I asked Kate to be able to come up here and share a little bit of the history here in this area. Thanks, Kate.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Senator Kemp, so much for this opportunity to come and afterwards the opportunity to actually hear from our public community. So thank you for that, and also for Pastor Newton for opening up your home to us. And I'd like to say, and it's just so fitting that we are actually holding this town hall meeting or discussion here at St. Stephen's Church, because this is actually ground zero for the civil rights movement. I was asked to talk a little bit about civil rights, but I can't start it in the 1950s, 60s, because they actually started decades earlier. And if you can remember back to when Asbury Park was actually founded in 1971, you realize that was just 6 years after the end of the Civil War. So that was in the midst of Reconstruction. And of course, Reconstruction was the opportunity to establish rights for African Americans and get them involved, get their feet up on the ground, move forward, to abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment and also the 14th Amendment. But then what happens after Reconstruction? There's the backlash of Jim Crow laws. And in my mind, I think that there could be a lot of parallels that we can learn from the past and the present. Because what happened in 2008? Our first president, Barack Obama was our first African-American president. We're so proud of it, but then there's another backlash. But to get into the historical aspect of Asbury Park, I really like to set the stage to those founding years, following the Reconstruction or during that period of time. Keep in mind that when it was founded, 10 years after it was founded, we had over 800 hotels, cottages, and boarding houses in Asbury Park. Asbury Park attracted thousands of white visitors to come and visit in the Asbury Park area. But we also saw an influx of blacks from the South seeking better employment and some trying to escape KKK backlash as well. So with the development of all these commercial businesses and hotels, what does that mean? We need waiters, porters, dishwashers, cooks, and these were elaborate ballrooms. They had bowling alleys, so they also required musicians. And when they came, where did they reside? They tended to reside on the west side of Asbury Park. And I might remind you when James Brown founded Asbury Park in 1871, that was really just the territory from Ocean Avenue to about Memorial Drive to where the railroad tracks are. So everything on the west was still a part of Neptune Township. And it wasn't just African Americans that lived there. It also brought an influx of Italians, Jews. A lot of the Italians are the ones that came and helped build the railroad and dig the ditches. We had our Latinos and Germans, so it was a very diverse neighborhood on the west side. But as things moved on, there tended to be a backlash once again, because you had all of these workers here, and they wanted to enjoy the boardwalk and beaches as well. So very quickly, there was a James Bradley started to introduce restrictions to access to these facilities. And in terms of the beach itself, he came up with a good idea. There was a section on the boardwalk, and everybody keeps thinking about the part south of this casino. But actually prior to that, they really were the main area. But he said, oh, I have a good idea. We'll restrict it to 5 to 7 a.m. That could be the time that the blacks, and that'll keep everybody happy. But of course it did not. So during that time, we had a series of what they call indignation meetings. And these were led by people such as Reverend Robinson that I mentioned. And also there was Reverend Dickerson as well. And Reverend Dickerson is also from, one of our churches. In fact, the churches were, just as Pastor Newton had mentioned, was really the forefront of civil rights activities. So there was a lot of activity there. And then eventually, because of the backlash, they did try to, and incrementally, okay, I know what we'll do. We'll put up placards where everybody, it was just the workers of the hotels, because they were complaining that they were taking away all of the prom spaces from the regular visitors. And what I'd like to do is kind of give you, so you can hear some of the voices from these prominent, outspoken people at that time, such as Reverend Robinson. And they did hold indignation meeting in places such as Stephen AME Church. And he says, we own land, we raise the wheat, the corn, and we help save the Union. We love our race and propose to vindicate our race when it is imposed upon us. But where the parlor is filled with guests, when did they refuse entrance to a colored man when they wanted a glass of water or cocktail? In the barbershops, the white people are willing to have our black hands upon their faces, and yet they object to our presence on the beach. And in terms of Reverend Dickerson, the right thing to do is basically just to weed out all bad character, because oftentimes they'll criticize blacks saying, oh, they're loud, they're doing this or that. And he says that sometimes there are white folks that I wouldn't want to hang around myself, so why are you just relegating it just to the African Americans? And one's financial ability to board at a hotel and dress well is not a criteria of one's moral worth. And when they had these indignation meetings, it wasn't just here local, they reached as far as St. Mark's Church in New York City. In fact, they even had busloads of folks to come to Asbury Park, and Reverend Robinson led what they call wait-ins, which was a precursor to the sit-ins that we experienced in the 1960s. And I just wanted to mention other names, such as Reverend A.E. Jensen, and he happened to be the pastor, the minister or reverend of St. Augustine's Church, which is my church right down the street. And then in terms of the progresses made, they finally said, okay, we will relinquish, but instead they gave them a part of the beach between 1st and 2nd Avenue. And that was the mainstay of things. And by the way, I think it's interesting that the coverage that had was beyond Philadelphia, New York, and area. I actually looked up newspapers in Indiana that was talking about, all the color folks taking over Asbury Park. There was also an article in the Fort Worth Daily Gazette, which I'd like to read to you. And they kind of refer to the hypocrisy of the North. Even if northern hotels and sleepers did refuse to take the medicine they insisted upon prescribing for their southern counterparts in the purifying waters of Long Branch, Asbury Park, etc. This compromise does not admit the races into the water during the same hours and marks the towels lest by chance the white hand and leg should be dried on the linen of a hand performed the same service by a black hand and leg a week before. Humbug. And in later years, eventually, James Bradley did relinquish to some extent that. And then Asbury Park was annexed to, not Asbury, the west side was annexed as a part of Asbury Park in 1903, so we also had the power of our vote. And because there was a period of time in 1912, there was a natatorium that was being built on the boardwalk right at 2nd Avenue. So even though for years they were satisfied with letting the blacks have this area anytime they want, once the natatorium went up, oh boy, they're in the sight of too many white folks. So once again, we have to move them. In fact, in the dead of night, they took all of the little houses they used for dressing rooms. They moved them out to 8th Avenue where the fishing area is. And of course, again, there was another backlash. So you do have people such as Atkins and also Dr. Parks, who was another prominent person that was active in that area. And okay, they had to let them have their place. So they were able to maintain their little playground for another 5 to 6 years. And then eventually, in 1915, or about 1911, excuse me, they actually they were successful in moving them south of the convention hall, of the casino area. That's the area between Ocean Grove and Asbury Park. In fact, today there's signs that say no swimming allowed. It's kind of dangerous to do so. So it seems as though the fight continued even onward after that. Then I'd like to take you into like the next century because the voices actually changed over time. Once you get into the 1920s, there was like the KKK, for example. An interesting thing about the KKK, we know it was in the South, and there were eventually some protests, but I noticed that it was a journal, 1923, the Savoy magazine, that had plenty of articles or advertisements posted in their program. So the KKK did creep up in this area and was like a mainstream organization. And then there are other voices such as Walter Upperman, who was a prominent attorney, F. Leon Harris. I might mention my grandfather, who was a community activist, and he and my grandmother were the founders of the Asbury Park Neptune NAACP, and Dr. Parks was actually the president of the NAACP at that time. So as I mentioned, the NAACP, I would say as we go into this next century, there were other voices, such as Irvin Jones in the 1970s, Howard West in the 1980s onward, along with Maxine and Thomas Daniels, who are prominent. He's actually an engineer of this area, and he was also a human rights activist. And then eventually Adrian Sanders. I'm just trying to go through a timeline just to give you a sense how the fight continues. Sometimes it's in a more subtle manner. It's the bias and segregation that creeps into the schools and into the workplace. So if you go back to the 1940s, as I mentioned, the West Side was a very diverse neighborhood. Banks Avenue was actually two different buildings, Banks Avenue North and South. The whites were in the north, and then this African Americans were in the south side. And then in 1946, there was a fight, and we also had Highland Ward, who was an African American principal. They fought, as I'm running out of time. Okay. Can I just mention one other thing? I won't mention, there's plenty of other people I don't want to overlook, but I just wanted to acknowledge Valerie Roberts here today, who earlier this evening received a proclamation from the senator, and I wanted to thank you very much for that. And the fact that her father opened up a business on Springwood Avenue in 1940, but he continued years after that, 60 years even after the uprising or riot of Springwood Avenue. So she was very wealthy, and she survived another 56 years. And after having recently put up the exhibit, The Commercial Rights of Asbury Park, I have learned that she's not just the longest African-American business operating on Springwood Avenue. Val's business is one of just a few businesses in continuous operation, not just in Springwood Avenue, but the entire city of Asbury Park.
Thanks for giving us that rundown, and really appreciate the chance to be able to just take a step back, because I know it gets so easy for us to just get caught up in the day-to-days. But now more than ever, it's important for us to have that broader context. I just want to run through just a few more issues, and then we'll open it up, because I want to make sure we have enough time for a good number of questions. I get asked a lot about this next issue, which is about the Gateway Tunnel. This is something that's unfortunately made national news, because Donald Trump said he's going to terminate the project and cut off all the funding to it. That's illegal. That's against all the contracts, and against what we have done in Congress, and that's something that we may need to make sure we're standing up for. Not just because it's important to New Jersey, which it is. I mean, this is important for our commuters. This is important for our economy. This is important for, I have this bipartisan group of mayors that I've been talking to out in the Raritan Valley that are talking about the importance for their communities. It's important for here. But it's also important for our country. This is a project that's going to bring in hundreds of billions of dollars in economic growth. It is arguably the most important concurrent construction project we have in the nation right now. So it's not just about our state or our region, it's of national importance. And which makes it all the more just infuriating when Trump, just because of political retribution, which is why this has happened, says it's just cutting off the money. Because this is like one of the, there are a lot of crazy things happening, so it's hard to make generalizations, but this is one of the clear, just shoot ourselves in the foot type of situations that I've seen. There really is nothing good that comes out of it. We have 1,000 construction jobs that were put on hold. Construction workers that I talked to, they talked about how they thought they were going to have a decade of steady work. Now they're not certain. Some of them moved up to the area to be able to do this type of work. And the idea that the president might change his mind if we put his name on Penn Station, have we gotten to that point where extortion is just so out in the open and rampant?
Yes.
Unfortunately, yes. And I'm glad that a judge has so far pushed back on this, and I'm glad that we have a governor that stood up as well. So thank you, Mikey Sherrill. Thank you to the Gateway. Thank you to the Fort Worth. Thank you to others that are standing up and fighting this. Because we were able to get over $200 million restored, but do I feel certain that this is going to continue? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So we got to keep at it through these legal challenges that are out there. but just continuing to raise the issue. And I had on a telephone town hall a Republican mayor that said, this is not a partisan issue. And we have to continue to press that. This is not something that we need to see, but unfortunately we're seeing that not just domestically, but internationally as well. We have an extortion foreign policy happening in this country. I was just in Munich last weekend at the Munich Security Conference, where we saw just left and right, unfortunately, allies from around Europe and around the world just telling me in meeting after meeting that they're just moving forward. They cannot wait for our country to get our act together. And what happened a couple weeks ago when Trump was literally threatening military action to take Greenland, that was just a breaking point. And what was really sad, and I say this as someone who worked in diplomacy, I worked in foreign policy before, is that it just became very clear to me in Munich, something that I already felt that I know you feel too, which is some of this damage that's being done right now is irreversible. It is irreversible, the damage. It's not going to be like, once Trump is out of office, we have another president, that we're not going to have a we're back moment anymore. The rest of the world just doesn't trust, not just Donald Trump, they don't trust our system of government right now. They don't trust the special interests, the billions of dollars of super PAC money that is, taking our democracy hostage. I think when the history books are written, that Citizens United decision will be seen as one of the most damaging and destructive things in the history of the nation. And it was tough. It was tough. I say that as someone who lived and worked on a NATO military base in Afghanistan, 15, 16 years ago. I saw our NATO allies come to our defense after September 11th. And now I see them literally they wanted to ask me, if something were to happen to our country, if an attack happened to our country right now, can you say for certain that your country, that America, would respond? That's what's at stake here. They are, whereas we, the way I would sort of kind of say it is like, we are no longer seen as the indispensable nation, we are seen as the unreliable nation. And it's only, honestly, it even goes beyond that now. Some of the countries that I talk to, their leaders say that when they're talking in their own national security way, that they now talk about our nation as a threat. They talk about our nation as a national security threat that they now need to hedge against. And so I just wanted to share that with you because I was just there a couple days ago and it's still very fresh from across the board. And we see that right now. Things aren't slowing down on the international level. If you're seeing some of the news today, Donald Trump has positioned military assets all throughout the Middle East. We have now 2 aircraft carrier groups out there, 10 naval destroyer ships out there, as he is now threatening, potentially in the next few days, taking sustained and significant military action against Iran. Now look, I don't think anybody here is going to defend Iran. We know the dangers that they pose. But we also know the dangers that this poses. As someone who worked in Iraq, worked in Afghanistan, I worry so much about what our country has been through, especially when we have so many other challenges. So I say that, look, to this crowd right now, how many, raise your hand if you want to see our country go to war with Iran next?
Nope.
Raise your hand if you think that if a president is going to take military action, that they need to hear from the voice of the American people and be able to bring this before Congress, right? This is just what I find so crazy about this situation is when we saw that military action in Venezuela, the boat strikes, the raid that got Maduro, we have not had a single public hearing in Congress, in the House or the Senate, dedicated to Venezuela, dedicated to the challenges that we're facing and this type of challenge that we're going through right now. I just wanted to share that with you because it is so unnerving, to see our government taking these steps that are putting our service members in harm's way. Do we have the best military in the world? Of course, and we are incredibly proud of how trained they are, but they are there for our defense. They are not there to be a personal militia to this president, that he can just use whatever he wants. It pains me whenever I take the train down to Union Station in DC and just see all the National Guard there. The idea that this president is trying to normalize us having military troops in our cities and in our streets, that is not right. You know, and that's the kind of challenge that we see when he's using federal agents in Minnesota, when he's using the National Guard around our country, and he's deciding that he singularly can make these decisions that put our service members in harm's way and potentially increases the chance that the United States gets bogged down in a military conflict. At a time when, again, the number one thing that we're concerned about is about affordability and the challenges that we're going through right now. And not only is he doing this militarily, but we're seeing that America first in foreign policy terms means America alone. And I saw that in Munich, and I see that with every other conversation that I'm having. And that scares me because, as I said, I got 2 little boys, and I don't want them to grow up in a world that is this chaotic and dangerous, but with America so isolated. You know, you gotta be a friend before you need a friend. And we're gonna have a lot of challenges going forward. These are dangerous times. But I can tell you, we'd be better at getting through that when we're doing it alongside our allies and our partners. And when we're doing it with the American people involved and united behind these decisions. The last thing I'll just say, and we'll open it up, just more on the personal side, but it's an issue that I think probably resonates with a lot of you. Some of you might have saw, I announced, I gave a speech about a month or so ago, talking about how my father's been recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. This has been a really challenging time for my family. We've seen this decline for some time, and it's all made all the more tragic by the fact that my dad was actually a scientist that dedicated his life to try to cure Alzheimer's. And now when we were at the doctor's office doing the memory tests and other diagnosis, the doctor was asking tests about, where was he born and this and that, and asked the question, what was your job, what was your career? And my dad said, I don't know. And you can't help but feel that Alzheimer's wins when my father no longer remembers that he was dedicating his life to trying to cure Alzheimer's. So I feel a real particular mission to really try to make sure we're pushing this forward, that we are engaging and continuing the medical research that this country so badly needs, that we've been leading on. And we can't let Donald Trump and RFK Jr. decimate the National Institutes of Health and decimate our ability to be able to do this type of cutting-edge research, which has saved so many lives. And one thing I will say, when people ask, what can you do in Congress, how can you push that? What I will say is that through the appropriations process, we were able to restore almost the entirety of the money that Trump was trying to cut from the NIH. Those are the types of things, I know, they don't make headlines, they don't always get that front page news, but there are ways that we've been able to push back, and those are things that we need to continue on. So I wanted to share that with you. But I also just wanted to say, this experience with my family and with my father, it has really shown me the challenges that so many face when it comes to caregiving as well. It's not just the fact that we have 200,000 people in New Jersey that have Alzheimer's. We have an estimated 600,000 people in our state that have Alzheimer's or dementia. But they're surrounding them are literally hundreds of thousands and millions of New Jerseyans, of Americans around this country, that are caregiving, that are trying to make ends meet, and seeing the incredible costs that it takes. Because now in our state, the average cost of a single room for residential residential elder care is roughly around $15,000 to $17,000 a month. Who can afford that? I mean, it's crazy how broken things are gotten. So I'm working on legislation that would try to open this up for Medicare to be able to earnestly do what it should have been doing all along and be able to help people through these situations. For us to be thinking about other types of reforms to be able to support, but also make sure that these caregivers know that they're not alone. and be able to give them some support and help. It's so important. I'll just end on this story. I had a neighbor a couple doors down from me a couple years ago, and I saw a for sale sign outside her door, and I saw her on the street, and I said, what's going on? I saw you put your house up. And she just started crying and telling me how her husband has dementia and they just can't afford the care and she needs to downsize. But she was saying like this was their forever home. You know, this was the home that they raised a family in and they were planning to grow old in. And she just broke down just talking about how broken this is, and she's saying like, I hope you can try to fix this one day. And I'll just tell you, I didn't understand fully what she was going through at that time. But I do now. And I just, you know, for as long as I am in the U.S. Senate, I just promise you I will stay on top of these issues about health care, stay on top of these issues about care in general and the challenges we are facing. And I'm going to do everything I humanly can to try to fix this once and for all, give us the kind of justice that we deserve when it comes to our lives, when it comes to our health care, and for us to be able to be there for our loved ones. And I hope that's something that people across the political spectrum want, because Alzheimer's doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Caregivers are Democrats, Republicans, and like it's all of us. So yes, we have issues that we're divided on. But I've also seen the power of trying to mobilize and build a movement around these issues that hit us at our fundamental core as human beings. And I think that hopefully will show us the way of how we pull out of this tailspin we're in as a country and get us back on a path where we can hopefully say to our loved ones that we will work and have the kind of support that they need to live a life of dignity and decency. Thank you. I'm going to take questions as long as we can. We do them two at a time just to kind of make sure we go fast and get through.
Sure. Senator King, thank you for coming and doing this town hall, first of all. I moved to Toms River recently. I'm a lifelong New Jersey resident, and I was stunned and frankly infuriated to find that my Congressman Chris Smith, who's been there for 41 years, is too good to do these. It's an absolute act of disrespect for constituents, and I don't know why we re-elect him. So thank you, and keep it up. The issue I would like to bring up with you, there's so many issues, but one I would like to bring up with you is for anyone in this room on Social Security, I'm not yet, I'd like to get some of those someday since I've paid all my life for it. If you're alive in 2033, you're going to get a 20% cut in your Social Security. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, unless Congress does something collectively and acts to secure funding for the Social Security Trust Fund, which is expected to go insolvent at that point, at which time payroll taxes are going to be the only source. So there's a lot of options out there. I hope you're thinking about them. Increasing the payroll tax, I think a donut hole strategy would be great. The one thing that would really, really upset me though, is if you did a means test and you said, hey, guy, you managed to save a few nickels because you didn't drive in your car, you didn't go on fancy vacations, etc. You don't deserve any of that Social Security that you've paid into all your life. So I hope to hear what you have to say about this issue, and someone has to do something about it. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Senator Kim. I'm Angela Tsai. I'm actually a local elected official in Morris County. I'm also a director of the Boys and Girls Club in Patterson and Passaic. And so I wanted to first thank you and your team directly, because just recently, as of last week, we found out that we got $500,000 worth of congressional directed spending to use towards trauma-informed wraparound care for our 2,000 young people and their families. So this is, in on-site mental health services, wellness, social emotional learning. So really, when you talk about how much you want to make sure care is brought to the communities that really need it, I really do believe you. So I want to give you a big thank you and round of applause. out, my question is, what kind of federal actions further do you believe are necessary in order to really sustain this type of mental health care that we see, the needs rising all across the country for our young people? How can we keep that care sustained through those communities that really do need it most?
Two of the biggest issues that I hear about, I'll take them in order. You're absolutely right. Our Social Security is not on a sustainable path here, and this is one of those issues that affects everybody, and it is very important that we take on. The solution that I've been supportive of so far, is this idea that we, like right now, the payroll tax capped at 184,500. That's not fair when others are making so much more, and so it's the idea that someone paid, earning $1 million, that they're basically capped at the same as someone earning, 180,000. So there's a proposal out there that it'll go up to that cap, but then it'll pick up again above 400,000. And that's something that, if we're able to do and make sure that, again, just about fairness here in terms of percentages that are out there, that is something that can put our Social Security on a much better path. I think that this makes sense. I think it's something that, especially after this big giveaway to the millionaires through the reconciliation bill last year, that makes sense in terms of how we can do this in a way that will be fair to the most number of people. So that's the approach. If there are other ideas that people have, if you want to get on my radar, let me know. But when I've kind of gone through this in greater detail, that's something that I think doesn't disadvantage those that are just continuing to try to struggle through, in the middle class life, making sure we're able to push forward on it. On the issue about, just brought up, first of all, I'm glad that, that funding was able to come through when it comes to, your organization, and it's just so important, especially for young people that are struggling. I'll tell you that the top issue that I hear about from educators and parents right now is about concern of mental health for our youth. It's something that is really alarming, especially given just what we're seeing when it comes to social media and technology. A lot of concerns. I think our state's moving in the right direction when it comes to some of these restrictions on phones and schools and other things that hopefully can be able to create some more space. But you're right, it has to be in a sustained way as well, going on top of that. This is one of those issues that infuriates me because when I talk to my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, mental health, especially for kids, is literally the top issue that I would say we're hearing kind of bipartisan support for in words, but we're just not seeing the space for this when it comes to legislation. In fact, after the Uvalde shooting down in Texas, we were actually able to pass legislation that was considered to be the largest push for gun violence prevention in decades. It was predominantly a mental health bill. It was predominantly a bill about supporting mental health called the Safer Communities Act. That is something that this current administration has gutted all the money to. So all the money that we came up with, this bipartisan approach to be able to do, has been held back by this president. And again, we just heard nothing from leaders on the Republican side about this. And so, I'm continuing to push on this. I'm grateful again that we have a state that has been focused on a lot of these issues, but we need to make sure we're doing better and keeping focused on this and coming up with an actual national strategy to be able to tackle mental health. And again, that's something that I think I can play a particular role on. I think there are not that very many of us in the U.S. Senate that are parents of young kids. Be able to talk about this firsthand, about the challenges and worries that we have for our kids and our grandkids is important. But that's an issue that I hope you all continue to raise up as well. It's not always, again, something that makes the front page news, but it's something that I really think everybody is understanding just how bad this is getting, and we have to stay on top of this. Thanks for raising. We'll do another round.
Senator Kim, I too want to thank you for coming to Asbury Park. I care about one thing only, the midterm elections. I would argue that our democracy hangs in the balance. And my question is about awareness of the SAFE Act. I talk to people from both sides of the aisle, and they talk about, I've been there bringing up the whole thing, the myth of, voter fraud, and, I don't think it's a bad thing to show an ID or whatever, and obviously, it goes so far beyond that. Marginalizing millions of women in this country who have changed their names. I vote by mail. It nullifies that. And I know this is just the first salvo of this administration. There's no way that they're going to really let these elections go on without cheating, this SAFE Act really concerns me. I'm concerned about where the DNC, where we spend our money in getting the word out. If I talk to people that don't even know what this act is, and they're saying, showing an ID is not a big deal, this is way, way beyond that. And we should put all of our money, all of our energy, it should be everywhere. And most importantly, the oligarchs you're talking about, who are sitting on that dais, who, let's be honest, they control everything right now. They have employees, young employees, female employees. Those employees have children. We need to be talking to them and getting it out. That's where the pressure is, to the Bezos and the Musks and to everyone out, that this will not stand. We cannot work for an organization like this. This has got to be some kind of massive effort, because November scares the hell out of me.
Senator Kim. Actually, you stole my first question in a way. I was going to ask you about NIH funding. As a healthcare advocate myself, at this point, those NIH cuts, how do we, as New Jersey residents, how can we help you fully restore those NIH cuts and to combat future threats to medical research and science in the country?
Yeah, thank you. Let me take them in reverse on this one. I think the NIH cuts are a reflection of just this broader turn away from science, right? That we're seeing left and right, a turn away from education that we're seeing left and right, and that's something that really alarms me in terms of just the trajectory that we're on. First of all, it is so damaging to our global competitiveness, to our economy. When we're thinking about our ability to innovate, that our ability to engage and be able to come up with the next cures, that's so important. But I hear from some of my Republican colleagues, they're like, well, the private sector can handle it. And it's so fundamentally wrong, because if you talk to any pharmaceutical company or biotech company, they'll be the first to tell you that it's the basic science, the basic research that they're able to build off from. That is something that that the government is able to do better than anybody else in terms of being able to mobilize, and that's our taxpayer dollars, right? I don't see us getting a rebate for that basic science, investment that we're making, and that's something that we need to make sure that we're pushing forward on. We should be proud of what our scientists have been able to do. People like my father that have been pushing on this and trying to cure these diseases. The reason why my father got into this is my father was born during the Korean War, in Korea during the war, and he was born with polio, and suffered from that, for that illness for the rest of his life, disabled him. And he saw during his lifetime great scientists nearly eradicate from the world, the plague that disabled him. And he was thinking through, what's the next challenge? Cancer and Alzheimer's became his next big push. And that's what we should be doing. That's forward momentum, right? Instead, now we're at a point where, I'm literally in hearings and hearing witnesses telling me that the polio vaccine is a threat to our health, and then we have, RFK Jr. literally said on a podcast that, he thinks that the polio vaccine has killed more people than it has saved. I mean, it's just absolutely atrocious. what is happening. But again, this is one of those issues that I think has strong support across the American people. And we have to make sure that we are pushing back to this. American people, across the political spectrum, understand the importance of medical research. And we cannot let the disinformation, and that's what it is, disinformation, not misinformation, disinformation, purposeful lies to the American people, about this, preying upon our fears. And I hate that too, because so often it's preying upon the anxiety of parents, right? Like, we get always spun up about challenges to our kids and issues that could affect them. And there are, people who are weaponizing this. Weaponizing this. And I just find that to be so scary that the people now weaponizing it are now in positions of such power, that they can try to stop this. So that's something I promise you I'll continue to push forward on, and it's so important. Look, I'm right there with you on the midterms. I want to talk about this because this is not a political event. This is, this is me as a senator to all here. So, but I can still talk on it, but I'm going to make sure I focus in on some of the issues before us in Congress. But the midterms are so important, and I say this as someone who literally ran for office the first time when Trump was in the Oval Office and there was a Republican Senate and a Republican House. So literally the reason why I am in politics and engaging is because of a situation similar to what we see now. But I would venture to say, and I think many of you would agree, I find this moment to be even more dangerous by far than the experience that we were going through in 2017. And as a result, we need to really be able to push on this and mobilize. First and foremost with the legislation that the gentleman was talking about, the SAVE Act. This is something that has become a major push by this administration and Republican leadership in Congress. As mentioned, it is trying to, again, weaponize fear of voter fraud that is being manufactured, that isn't happening nearly to the level that they are talking about in terms of just the fundamental concern to our democracy. And they are using this as a means to push an agenda that is in line with the broader ecosystem of things that this administration is pushing. You have to think about it as another prong of this offense that they're doing, in line with what they tried to do with gerrymandering in states across this country. Literally cheating, literally doing things that are just trying to put things in their advantage. This is another tool in that toolbox. As mentioned, this would be a piece of legislation, for instance, that would require women who changed their names when they got married. Now, if you want to register to vote, you have to bring your pen. You would have to be able to bring your birth certificate. Something that shows your previous name. Not even a passport now would do, because that doesn't verify your original name. And just the depths to which it goes that is clearly singling out women in that type of way when it comes to that. It would make it such that you can't use a driver's license, even a real ID, to be able to validate your ability to be able to register to vote. It would require something like a passport for the rest of us. And look, we're at a time when less than half of Americans in this country have a passport right now. And so just it's important to be able to just point out, this is not a piece of legislation that is put forward in good faith. This is something that is being weaponized, being pushed in a very dangerous way, trying to scare the electorate, trying to make it seem like that is what's the threat to our democracy. And you see that also utilized by Trump when he's talking about federalizing our elections. Again, something in direct opposition to our Constitution. And so, these are the things that we have to be vigilant on. I will say that there is a very extensive national effort on the political side, on the Democratic Party side more broadly with NGOs and others, that is inaction geared towards the midterms and the 28 election. We saw it in action in the 24 election. We saw it here in New Jersey with the governor's race. A significant number of attorneys and experts that are mobilizing. And so, is there more that we can do? I'm sure that there is, and I'm going to check in, with this operation and see what can be pushed forward. But I will say that as we have seen special election after special election all across this country over the last, 14, 15 months, every single one of them showing a very strong lean against what this president is doing, double digits in Texas and elsewhere. I will say that gives me some hope that this is something that will not be, hopefully, a major concern. We have not seen, after those big losses by Republicans, concerted efforts to challenge the results, a concerted effort to be able to discredit the results. And that gives me some hope that this is hopefully not going to manifest in what we saw when it came to the 2020 election. As someone who was there at the Capitol on January 6th, I never want to see our country go down that path again. But I will make sure that I am vigilant on this. It certainly concerns me. But I want you to know that many people are focused on this, and we hope to make sure we can mobilize what's needed to ensure the credibility of your vote. Thank you.
I live in Delanco, and I'm part of District 3. And I got to tell you, 2018 was the most exciting campaign year. You had me at the Affordable Care Act that were in favor of that. I've been a nurse for 47 years. I see what happens. But there's so many things that I agree with you about, and I just really love that you're a senator from New Jersey. But I have to know, what were you thinking when you voted for Christie?
Yeah.
I need to know that.
Yeah, you deserve an answer on that.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I will.
Hello?
Make sure you guys come down to the front. No, you don't have to walk up. There's a bunch of questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a citizen of Asbury Park, and I have a question about bringing jobs to the community, this community, Asbury Park, especially for our young kids. I have a 15-year-old son who's eager to work, and it's not really any jobs for any, not just him, but any young kids here in the city. How do you feel about bringing jobs?
Yeah. Let me take that in order. So first, thank you for coming up from South Jersey. I'm really proud to be the first U.S. Senator from South Jersey. I'm the first Senator from South 195 in 7 decades. And really want to make sure that I can shine a light on the challenges that are happening all across our state. And as someone who represented the Shore before as well, wanted to lift up communities like Asbury. Look, on your direct question about the Christie vote, it was a complete mistake. I admit that. I was thinking it through as I'm a member of the Homeland Security Committee. So if you look at the others, Democrats that voted yes, for the others are on the Homeland Committee. And what we were thinking about as a group is look, we know how dangerous things are going to be when it comes to immigration. Can we try to be some bridge that can have some open communication with her? Especially when I was thinking about the issues facing New Jersey. Over 50% of the constituent service cases that my office gets are about the Department of Homeland Security in some way. And I was thinking, maybe there needs to be someone in the state that can get a hold of her. And if there are crises and challenges that we face on immigration, at least one of us has a direct channel to her. And so that's why I didn't vote. The Republicans already had enough votes to get her passed, and I thought if I could at least try to deliver a channel that could maybe help some constituents down the road, that was maybe worth it. It was not, and it was a mistake. I mean, and it's something that I'm learning from, and I think, just in general, I'm going to continue to do better. And as I said, I'm going to make some stumbles here and there, but I hope you see me as someone who has the self-reflection and the humility to understand when I did something wrong, and to earnestly fight to be able to try to fix it. And so, that's something that I'm going to try to do. When it comes to the question about jobs, absolutely. I mean, that needs to be at the top of the list of what we're trying to push forward on, especially when we're talking about different parts of New Jersey and making sure the growth we're seeing is everywhere, but also the right kind of growth, right? Whether it's housing or jobs, I mean, we're seeing, again, oftentimes it happening in such uneven ways, and like when we're seeing what comes next when it comes to artificial intelligence. I mean, the technology is certainly very impressive, but I have a real fear that this is only going to further the wealth inequality in this country, only further the challenges that we're seeing when it comes to jobs. I worry that the jobs that the technology is likely to make obsolete are the jobs that are the backbone of the working class, of entry-level young people trying to get into white-collar jobs and others, and it's going to allow those that are the wealthiest to be able to continue to keep that money and wealth and continue to grow it. So, those are the things that we need to make sure we're focused on. I am pushing right now on something that is about trying to spur innovation in our state. I gave a speech about 2 months ago about something called building the Einstein corridor. I kind of dubbed it this idea of an Einstein corridor, that we are a state of Albert Einstein, we are a state of Thomas Edison, we are a state that had led the world in terms of innovation. Yes, we're still strong when it comes to life sciences, but we haven't been pushing in the way that I think we could be to be able to generate that kind of momentum and diversify the innovation that we're in. For instance, this is something that I learned. This is, it might sound a little nerdy, but I've been learning about this industry called photonics. Probably something that maybe not a lot of you have heard of before. I didn't certainly know much about it, but this is the type of technology like fiber optic cables, like medical imaging, and so many other things that we see in different applications. New Jersey has the largest and densest concentration of photonics companies in the entire world. This is technology that can be incredibly transformative. Something that came out from our leads on companies like Dell Labs and things that we can continue to push on. That's something that I'm trying to grow and trying to make sure that if you look at it, we're able to get people trained in our community colleges straight into these businesses. It's something that isn't just for the elites. This is something that can create mobility. Those are the things that I'm trying to push on, but again, always being mindful about how we grow and making sure that this isn't going to further concentrate wealth and opportunity, but this is something that can hopefully expand it. So please, keep an eye on some of these projects I'm doing. I think Asbury has a great opportunity to be able to really take advantage of this. We see the investments that's happening in the film industry down the road. Asbury is a place that's drawing a lot of young people and mobilizing a lot of interest, that type of way of people coming in to this community. Again, we need to do it in the right way, though. That isn't something that's going to hurt those of us that are already here, those of you who are already here. This needs to be something that is being thoughtful as we push forward. So I hope to continue to work with all of you on that.
Hi, Senator Kim. Jeff Laurenti from Trenton. I appreciate very much your having introduced the question of Iran into the public debate, because it is quite shocking that official Washington seems to be like a deer staring into the headlights, not acknowledging that the Trump administration is intent on a massive war. At least George Bush had bothered to ask Congress for a resolution to authorize this invasion. He had even bothered to ask the UN Security Council. Trump has done none of this, and yet the Congress is indifferent, and I hope that perhaps the proposed war powers resolution that Tim Kaine and others are offering will be, it can somehow get traction. But this points to the larger problems, that this is being billed to us as nuclear non-proliferation. And just 10 days ago, the Trump administration allowed the last set of restrictions on nuclear arsenals of the United States and Russia to expire. And Trump said, if it expires, it expires. And they are evidently looking now to restart nuclear weapons testing that we haven't had since in some 35 years. Can the Congress put in legislative requirements, mandates that the U.S. continue to observe the New START limits, as long as Russia does, and to prohibit nuclear testing? And are there vehicles that are, quote, must-have legislative vehicles in order to force this, I don't want to say force it down Trump's throat, but to force him to have to accept it?
Hi, my name is Yolanda Curry, and I'm calling about two things. Excuse me. And I'm talking about two things: affordability and homelessness. I am a U.S. ex-vet, and I look at a lot of my vets. We get together and we talk about homeless all the time. And the sad part about it is that you have a lot of vacant buildings, empty buildings. Why don't you get with these CEOs and tell them stop building these and reinvent some of these other buildings and get the homeless people to do the job too, and they can work with them. And they have a job and they have a place to live. Because the way things are going right now, we all gonna be somewhere looking for something. And you know me, I speak what I feel because I feel that right now, a lot of my friends are veterans. We get together, we talk about different issues, and we try to do it. I advocate by myself. I do have some friends that when we see homeless people, we feed them. We try to give them a place to stay. I can't give you that because I have no organization, but I do want to see something come out of this where these empty buildings could be buildings that are now furnished where people can have a place to call home.
Hi, Senator Kim. My name is Martha Hickson. I'm a resident of Little Egg Harbor, but you and I first met in a different part of the state when I lived in the town of Washington up in Warren County. My issue then is the same as my issue now, and that is the First Amendment, which I think is at the foundation of just about everything that's been mentioned here tonight. This town hall is a vivid example of the First Amendment in action. And almost 2 years ago to the day, I was very privileged to have you attend my town hall. And that town hall was necessitated by the fact that I was a high school librarian under attack as book banners tried to remove books from my school library, books having to do with people of color and LGBTQ plus individuals. School librarians were really the canary in the coal mine as far as censorship goes. We've seen, Pen America tells us that since 2021, more than 23,000 books have been banned in U.S. schools. And what started in schools has now morphed. You know, it turned into Don't Say Gay in Florida. Now it's Don't Say Plato in Texas universities. Our president is having the Smithsonian Institution send its exhibits to him for his approval. We're seeing journalists being stifled, and even popular entertainment. Just look at Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert. It is a great concern. Censorship is not a partisan issue. Large majorities of people on both sides of the political aisle are opposed to it. And so what I'd like to know is, what are you and your peers doing to reach across the aisle to shore up, protect, and preserve the First Amendment rights of every person in this country to speak, read, and think freely?
My name is Makan Bidwai, Senator. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to touch base between the social security question and the DHS. There's a union of those two problems. I have personally contributed to Social Security for over 10 years. I was eligible to get my pension 3 months ago. They denied it to me because I was a whistleblower, H-1B whistleblower, and I went out of status. I reached out to the DHS director himself, Alexandro Mariabas, the predecessor for Christy Nome, and he said, my problem is Congress's problem because I am an H-1B whistleblower and there is no provision to accommodate my immigration status, and at the same time, my contribution in Social Security, which is going to dry out in 2033, I'm already feeling that it's dried out. I'm not getting anything. I have reached out to Constituent Services. They have already acknowledged that there is a legislative gap. So what would you propose to accommodate? Because on the one side, I have done everything legally, and I have been in a limbo, and my wife, suppose something would happen to me, she would get the pension. I have 2 US citizen daughters too. They would get the pension, but right now my wife is in the same limbo. So I'm requesting a legislative pathway.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Let me just start there. I mean, if you don't, have you already talked to my team about this? Amanda, okay. Let me follow up with Amanda and just get a little bit more detail from what she's been able to do. And just real large, like I'm glad you raised this because a huge part of what I do is on the constituent service side. I think so often people think about my job as primarily down in DC for the hearings and whatnot, but like a huge part of my staff is here in New Jersey, and you can imagine just the sheer volume of people that are struggling, whether from on the veteran side and the VA and the challenges there, and I'll get to your question in a second. So let me get a little bit more details about this and some of the details. If you want to pass me something, I'll take it. Okay, I'll take the homework. Yeah, let me take this for the road. But look, this is important. This is what this job should be about, right? Is being responsive to the needs. So much what I learned about doing 92 town halls is that, so often when someone has a chance to be able to talk to their representative, it's something very tangible, something that they're worried about. And I want to raise what you said as well. You said you're a veteran, is that right? So thank you for your service. Thank you so much. That is something that really needs to be more than what unfortunately sometimes it is. There's a basic promise that our country makes, which is that if you and others step up to serve our nation and risk your lives to defend us, that we will then take care of you for the rest of your life. And that unfortunately is a promise that is broken time and time again. I often say that the word homeless and the word veteran just should never be next to each other. That should just never be a concept that exists in our society. And unfortunately, it is something that we see so prevalent in New Jersey and around the country. And so I've worked very hard on these issues, especially when I was representative of the 3rd District. I think had the highest number of veterans of any area in the entire state. We have been pushing forward on a number of different projects trying to get veteran housing built. It's not easy though. And a lot of times we have to work with the local communities for zoning issues and other types of things that hopefully we need to get better at. So, you really raise a point that I will make sure I follow up with, both in terms of just any issues that you and the veterans that have concerns about directly, and see how we might be able to try to help support and make sure that they have roofs over their heads. But also just more broadly, these are the types of projects that we should be moving forward on. Not all of our housing solutions in the state need to be, luxury condos with a Manhattan skyline, right? And we need to be thinking about how to build more broadly. We are pushing forward on legislation in a bipartisan way, trying to get legislation through, and we do have a number of provisions there that are focused on veteran housing. So I'll try to kind of re-up with my team and see what we can push forward on. But I'll be honest with you, it's not something that's going to be able to take immediate effect, and it's also not something that's scaled to the level that is needed. And we are seeing this all the more difficult because this president has also gutted the VA at such a significant and deep level that it is something that we're seeing huge problems and backlogs when it comes to disability pay and other types of things. So I'll make sure that we follow up with you directly on this. I have a disabled veteran on my team specifically focused on outreach and engagement with veteran communities across New Jersey. It is something that we feel very strongly about. With these last two issues, maybe I'll take the question about around first. This is, it's, people don't necessarily know this part about my career too much, but I actually worked briefly in the Senate as a staffer. I worked as a graduate school fellow in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I actually worked under a Republican, Senator Lugar from Indiana. And he was incredible. He offered me the job, and I went to him and I said, Senator, with all due transparency, I just want you to know I'm technically a registered Democrat. And he was like, oh my God. Well, technically, I'm a registered Republican. And I was just like, that was the times when, especially on foreign policy, we could try to set aside some of the partisan differences. But, it was the Republican Party that led on a lot of the issues of trying to restrict after the Soviet Union, when it came to nuclear weapons. And to now find ourselves in this place where we are seeing basically a new arms race that our country is now firmly engaged in. But not only that, we're engaged in this with Russia and China, but these conversations that I had in Munich, for instance, the unreliability of America and our commitment to NATO is now making some of our European allies talk about building up their own nuclear capabilities or extending the deterrence from the UK or France rather than on the United States. There are Middle East countries, there are Asian countries. South Korea, I was there last year, and South Korea is having conversations about starting up a nuclear weapons program because of their concern when it comes to the Trump administration. So this is very concerning when they're gutting these diplomatic tools like New START, which is bipartisan support, that Trump is talking about nuclear weapons testing as if that's something that we need to do. It's absolutely wrong and irresponsible to even mention that. And I'm hopeful that we can push. Well, I have raised this with a few of my Republican colleagues, and they have raised their own concerns about this trajectory. I think part of the problem, though, is that there is a sense that this new arms race that we're in, especially vis-a-vis China, that it's unstoppable. And that's just such a depressing perspective. I don't want my kids to grow up in a world with even more nuclear weapons than the world that I grew up in. And just the concerns about that at such a deep and fundamental level are real, and just the idea that we're in this space. We are in this space in part because of things that Trump is doing. Trump is trying to push us into a world that is geared and reduced down to this idea of might makes right. He is intentionally tearing down multilateralism. He's intentionally pulling us out of treaties, including on climate change and other important issues. And then he's complaining about how China's increasing their weapons and Russia's taking actions. Well, look, what has this president done to try to constrain Russia when we see him continue to push forward? I met with Zelensky in Munich and was talking to him about the importance that we could do in the United States to sanction, for instance, Russia's shadow fleet. Why is it that we're going after Venezuela but not going after Russia, right? These are the things that we need to make sure we're pushing on. So, look, as some of you know, I was a State Department officer. I'm actually the only career State Department officer in the United States Congress. I feel strongly about the importance of lifting diplomacy, of ensuring that we don't give up on multilateralism and not letting Trump dominate and create this might makes right transactional foreign policy that I think will lead our kids and our grandkids generation down a very dangerous path. So that's important. On this issue that was raised about our First Amendment, about, first of all, thank you to our librarians. Can we give a shout out to our librarians? You have been at the front lines in ways that you may never have expected to be, but you and others around this country have just been real pillars, and such great models for our kids as well to understand the importance of protecting free speech, but also just respecting books, respecting learning, respecting things that should be so core to our society at a fundamental level. A couple things that I'm pushing on. I'm on the Commerce Committee that has oversight over the FCC. I don't know if you saw, but a couple weeks ago we had the FCC chairman in front of us, and I really grilled him on this issue about independence of the FCC. And I asked him directly. I said, "Do you think Donald Trump's your boss?" And he was just going on and on. Well, he appointed me and this and that. And I said, "Do you think he's your boss?" And he said, "Well, he has the right to be able to fire me." This is a guy that during the hearing, that he said in the hearing that he doesn't think the FCC is an independent agency, when it was literally created to be an independent agency. And while we were doing that hearing, after he said that it's not an independent hearing, and we pointed out that the FCC website literally says it's an independent agency, at that hearing, while we were doing it, the FCC staff, political staff underneath him, deleted independent agency from the FCC website. Can you believe that? But that's where we're in. And I reminded this FCC chairman that Donald Trump's not his boss, the American people are his boss. And he does not have the right to be able to take orders from Donald Trump. If Donald Trump says things, which he often does, about going after specific TV stations or others, I asked him, do you consider that to be a direct order from your boss? Is that something that you have to then take on? It shows why it's important to be able to have independent agencies. Otherwise, what's the point of all of this? That's the line between dictatorship and authoritarianism, right? Is that Donald Trump cannot hold all the levers. And we have to push against this theory that that Russell Vought, who again is a very dangerous man. If you don't know that name, he is the OMB director. He is somebody that's pushing this idea of the unitary executive, this idea that all power can be concentrated just in the president. No, the Constitution also says that the president has to be able to implement the laws of this country, which are dictated by Article 1. So these are the things that I'm going to continue to push through on. I am engaged in a bipartisan group that's trying to save our Smithsonian. I'm sad that I even have to say that, but our Smithsonian is under direct attack. We see that left and right. But I will say we should be proud in New Jersey because Lonnie Bunch, who's the head of the Smithsonian, is a New Jersey kid. Someone who, as we're celebrating Black History Month, he was the one that envisioned and created and led the Smithsonian African American History Museum, which is extraordinary. Please, if you are down in DC, you have to see this extraordinary museum. But he is somebody that is under personal threat. They are trying to come after him, discredit him, and discredit so many of the others at the Smithsonian. And this is dangerous, not just for the Smithsonian, but you see this when it comes to the entirety of what our country is trying to do with the 250th anniversary celebrations right now. The president has completely hijacked those efforts at the federal government level, and it very much looks to be pushing this, as you can imagine, towards a propaganda approach for his kind of history, which we saw an example of as they took down those posters of the history of slavery in Philadelphia. The idea that that's now going to be pushed all over this country. So I just raise that with you because if you don't mind, we'll send you some email follow-up to this town hall because I'm running my own efforts here in New Jersey. trying to push forward and do essay contests and other things for our young kids in schools to be able to lift up. I'm looking to do other programs across this state, so very interested in seeing what we can do to work together to make sure that we have programs that can celebrate our history and be able to do so in a way that is inclusive, do so in a way that really lifts up the entirety of what we're trying to do. So that's another thing that I just wanted to lift out, because we just announced that just the other day, and that's something that I'm really grateful for. Look, I'm going to stick around longer to be able to talk if you haven't had a chance to be able to ask me your question. But I want to be mindful that it's probably getting close to dinner time. I have no idea what day of the week this is, but I'm sure it's between Sunday and Saturday. But I will just say it's been a great honor to be able to stand before you and be able to do this town hall. I hope it was meaningful to you. I'll just say, let me say one last thing here, if you don't mind. Because it was kind of raised, not every member of Congress does town halls, and that number is getting smaller and smaller. And it already was small before, and as mentioned, there are Congressman Chris Smith, he's been in Congress longer than I've been alive. And I think I've done 92 more town halls than he has. But just more broadly, just at large, this is what you deserve. And it really pisses me off that elected officials don't do these types of forms. I get it. It's challenging, and I don't know what's going to be asked. I've had a lot of tough ones before. But that's the point, right? I often say, if I'm not having uncomfortable conversations, if I'm only having comfortable conversations in politics, it means I'm not talking to all the people I need to be talking to. I get it. A lot of people in the state voted for me. A lot of them didn't. A lot of people voted for Kamala. A lot of people voted for Trump. I get it. There are differences of opinions. But I try to put myself into places where I can have those uncomfortable conversations. And I just urge you to as well. As you're engaging with your own network, your neighbors and whatnot, I'm sure you have people in your lives that have different opinions. Let's find ways to try to push ourselves to have some of those conversations, to find a way to be able to do so in a respectful way. There is always this line by Martin Luther King that stands out to me. We all know the I Have a Dream speech. We know the ending by heart. But there's a line in there that has really been a North Star for me in politics, where he says, "Let us not try to quench our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." And it's important to be able to just think through that. So I am putting myself out there tonight. And I'll tell you, it's not just a concern about uncomfortable conversations. We've unfortunately have had a lot of security concerns in politics, things that I never wanted to have to consider, but unfortunately we do. So if you don't mind, give just a round of applause to our officers. Thank you so much for giving us the space. But your turnout, the conversation that we had, I take it to heart. It very much encourages me to do more of these, to continue to make sure that with this toxicity that we have in our society, we cannot let them not convene. We cannot let them divide us physically in this way. We need to continue to have these conversations. We need to continue to do it in person and gather as a community, gather as Americans, and gather as citizens talking about what comes next for our country, because God knows we have a lot to talk about. Thank you so much, everybody.